afternoon, everybody. You're listening to Booklovers Corner, and we're brought to you on Arrow 92.7 FM at 3:30 every fourth Tuesday of the month, and we are kindly sponsored by Almo's Bookstore of Carterton, High Street, Carterton. Now, let me introduce you. Today we have a full house. We have Jackie.
Hi, Margie.
And Julie.
Hello, Margie.
And Valda. So
Margie.
we are a full house today, and so we're going to have a lot to cover. Now, Jackie, do you want to start with what you've been looking at and what you've been reading?
Yes. Well, I'm going to talk about a book called Major Tom by David Barnett. It was published in 2017 by Orion Books. David Barnett is actually born on the 11th of January in 1970. He's an English journalist and an author. He's published several books, but this is the first book of his that I have read. The reason I did so is because of an article in The Guardian about a new genre called uplit, which is uplifting literature.
Right.
And this is opposed to the downlit or the thrill lit or whatever we've been having over the last few years.
Or the chicklet.
The chicklet, possibly. It's also, it came about because one of my book club members started to talk about it. She wanted a change from her usual diet, which was miserable Irish childhoods. Usually Catholic miserable Irish childhoods.
Yes, I got the feeling anything that's sort of Irish and poor and poverty and all the rest of it.
All of that.
Yeah.
So we were looking for something different. The article in the Guardian said that their market leaders until recently more and more book buyers are seeking out novels and non-fiction that is optimistic, not feel good, but is an appetite for everyday heroism, human connection and love, but not romance.
I noticed the difference between love and romance. You mean it's not our Mills and Boone?
Some of it's not that great.
Okay.
So I've been looking for a new direction. So after a few false starts in this genre, I condemned a few because they were too whimsical, too self-absorbed in a personal journey, magic realism, shut up, and so on. But I became gripped by this book, calling Major Tom, but even on the face of it, I shouldn't have, because it's science fiction to a certain extent.
And you don't like it.
And I don't like science fiction.
Yes.
It's a heartwarming tale of friendship, family and forgiveness, and I'm starting to feel nauseous, but in fact...
What's this about the forgiveness? I mean, is this the love and the kindness coming through?
It's love and kindness coming through and acceptance,
yes.
But we'll get to that in a minute. But it's also about the world's most unlikely astronaut. So really that saying, never judge a book by its cover, comes into its own in this particular instance. So, Thomas Major, which is the band's name, is in a spaceship on his own and on his way to Mars to set up for the possible colonisation of the planet. Now, despite this scenario, the story is actually set in the present day. Naturally, with a name like that, he has been the butt of a million jokes about Major Tom. He's a David Bowie fan, but he also has the gift of being able to make everything that happens about him. He's very self-centred. He is personally affronted that David Bowie died on Thomas's birthday, the 11th of January. Everything's a personal insult to Thomas. This also coincided with his selection as the astronaut to go to Mars. It's a situation he ended up in by accident, but with some designing of his own. In fact, it's very implausible, but hysterically funny. And I'm not going to say any more about that. You really do need to read the book.
So you could read it even though this is not your genre.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's so well written. There's so much humour in it. It's very good. Also, by coincidence, this author's birthday is the 11th of January. There's a lot of references to the author and his background throughout this book. And you get that because, if you Google it. David Bowie's space oddity is a recurring motif throughout this book. And some of the best humour is around Thomas trying to educate people about Bowie's Ziggy Stardust phase. And I'll talk a bit more about that later because it is very good. Thomas is very happy to be on his own, far away from other people and their problems. But beneath his grumpy exterior lies a story and a sadness that have soured him. And I think the story is a very real story. It's about, it's a little boy who really adored his father, and his father was just human and made a really stupid mistake. and Thomas never really got over it. And again, read the book. The story moves back and forth in time. We learn how he became such a curmudgeon, what happened with his parents, his own marriage, now over, and his working life. In Wigan, this is coincidentally where the author lives.
Wigan is a town.
Wigan is a town, yes. There's also a book about it.
Wigan Pier.
Yes, The Road to Wigan Pier.
Wigan Pier
Yes.
by
George Orwell.
George Orwell. Or Eric Blair.
Or Eric
How's
Blair.
that for being clever?
Oh, right.
Yes.
This is a quiz program, is it as well?
It is, yes. It's a trivia night.
Trivia, literary trivia.
Anyway, in Wigan, 15-year-old Ellie Ormerod is determined to keep the family together. Her brother, 12-year-old James, and 71-year-old Gran. Dad is in prison and Mum is dead. Ellie can't confide in anyone as she is terrified that if social services discover their true situation, they will break up the family and take it into care. So she works illegally at night and on the weekends to bring in money, as well as going to school. In fact, she's missing quite a lot of school at this stage. Gran has the beginnings of dementia and has a terrible secret regarding some window envelopes, letters from the council that she has hidden. Their lives connect when Thomas in his spaceship, hurtling away from Earth, decides to call his ex-wife one last time, using the old-fashioned phone that is part of the spaceship's fittings. The spaceship has been bought third-hand from the Russians.
Oh, I love it. I wonder who had it second-hand.
And the phone is answered by Gran. The number is no longer his ex-wife's, but it's been allocated to the Ormerod family. Now, Gran is coming in and out of reality. So when she answers the phone, it seems perfectly normal to her that she's talking to somebody in space.
Right.
That's
yes.
okay.
These things happen.
These things happen. Eventually, Tom becomes part of their drama. Very reluctantly at first, via the old phone, which gets less reliable the further from Earth he goes. James, 12-year-old James, is a nerd. He loves science and has been picked for a junior science competition. He decides to ask Tom for help, but it is hard work getting through Tom's surliness. Here is an exchange between Thomas and James. "Is that Major Tom?" says James. "There isn't anyone else here, you do realise that. And you don't have to call me Major Tom all the time. In fact, I'd prefer it if you didn't. I'm not actually a major, and my name is Thomas." "Oh," says James, "but I like calling you Major Tom." "And you do know that it's from a song, don't you?" "Yes," says James, "that guy who died last year." "That guy," says Thomas, his voice dripping with what James imagines is contempt. "That guy, you mean David Bowie, one of the greatest musical geniuses that Britain ever produced." "Yeah, him. He sung Major Tom, didn't he?" The sigh echoes down the connection. It's not called Major Tom, it's called Space Oddity. That's not too difficult a concept to get your head around, is it? "Fine," shouts James. "Do you have to be so cranky?" And that's about all I'm going to say about the book's plot. It does have a bit of a pat ending, but it's nice all the same.
And that's why it fits into
It's
this.
okay.
It fits into the genre.
Well, yes, although I was a little disappointed, but never mind. But it's very well written. It's got lots of humour. It's not sentimental, except the end is a little bit. The characters and their situations are very real, and they were people I could relate to very easily. Ellie at 15 is having to cope with the day-to-day grimness of trying to keep things going. She's trying to keep food on the table, which means that she has to make the grocery list. She's got to do the shopping. She can't trust Gran. Gran could disappear any old where.
Yes.
And she can't use James because James is only 12. So she's having to do all this herself. She's trying to keep things like clean clothes going, so they've got something to wear to school. And she's worrying about the power bill while also trying to keep the place warm. Mm-hmm. Their responses to the various challenges they have to face are very human. They range from steadfast resolution to downright cowardice and denial. And the denial bit becomes almost, you get to the point where you just want to scream at it, "Ellie, go and tell a grown-up. Just go and tell somebody." You're drifting further and further. But It deals with people trying to cope with lives that have, for one reason or another, and often through no fault of their own, gone off the rails. Their father is in prison, but he's not in prison for anything awful. He just drifted into something that he didn't realise was going to end up as a bad thing. And he's a bit weak, he's a bit soft, but he's only going to be in prison a very short time. But it's long enough for them to go completely off the rails. Kindness often and accepted, yes. Basic human decency are major themes, and that's no pun with the major. But it's not sentimental. It's not everybody turns around to be nice to them. There are certain aspects of human nature that don't come through very well, but there is a level of kindness that does come through. On the whole, it was a good read for those who have been looking for something away from the bleak Scandinavian thrillers and the miserable Irish childhood. No, the thrillers I still read. They are my bread and butter, so to speak.
But was this a nice sort of warming, wintry kind of...
Hot cup of cocoa.
Hot cup of cocoa.
With serial killer outside in the snow.
Yes.
Yes.
No, I meant your stories.
Well, yes, it is. It is. One of the reviews I read said that if you liked The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry,
which we've done,
and A Man Called Over, you would like this book. Well, I didn't actually like The Unlikely Pilgrimage, etc. And my glance at A Man Called Over didn't lure me in. However, I did like this book, and even though, that's...
So maybe that's a lesson. Try something new every now and again.
Try something new.
Yes.
And I do have a couple of others lined up. The other one that I thought belonged in this was Elizabeth is Missing. I think that belongs in this genre.
I thought of that when I saw your notes. I thought Elizabeth is Missing is kind of in that.
It is in that same field.
That genre, and also they mention Eleanor Oliphant.
Yes, and I haven't read that yet, but that's coming up.
That's one
because you did both of those
a few times ago.
Yes.
And
the other one that I thought fitted in this was the one that I did for a New Zealand writer, which was Fixing Mrs. Philpott.
Okay.
Again, that's about people in bad circumstances, but through kindness and acceptance and being resolute, things finally worked out. I mean, there's no magic answer to any of it.
No. But a little bit of kindness goes a long way.
But a little bit of kindness, and that's really what this was about.
Right.
So I thought it was a good book. I think people should. I can see myself dipping into it and dipping into that area more than perhaps I might have had I not stumbled across this one.
Has he written others?
Yes, he has, but I haven't looked at them. This was the first one. I think he's written about 8 books. I think something like that.
Now this follows an article you read in The Guardian that was about these books.
Yeah,
that there seems to be a reaching the bestseller list.
Yes,
that books of this nature.
That's right.
And there was sort of a commentary on maybe it's time with all our bad economic. I was trying to work out what
it was
so
to do.
terrible.
It was indeed. Yes, it was. The article is about a year ago, I think.
Okay.
And it was talking about the economic situation and about how things were quite bad, and the literature was reflecting it. And then there was a slight change, and there was a trend where people were starting to look for more positive, more optimistic literature.
But I mean, this is the thing, books take you into another realm.
Yeah.
And often in bad times, books sell well.
Yes.
Because people are looking for that other world that they can live in.
Yes.
Rather than their own.
And this particular book, when I was reading it, because it's set in England, and England is not very nice at the moment, I think, in lots of ways.
Well, they're very unsettled.
And they're very unsettled, and they have, they're now with the Windrush issue that's going. It's just so absolutely dreadful. And these are people who are at the bottom of the heap.
Right.
These are just local people at the bottom of the heap. And this is a 15-year-old girl struggling to try and keep some semblance. What she's really trying to do is to make sure that nobody on the outside can see how terrible things are at home.
Yes.
So Gran is, well, she gets lost at one stage, and she rings Major Tom. She has a cell phone, and she rings him in his spaceship to say that she's lost, and can he help her get home?
Well, I'm sure there
and he does. But of course, it starts to change him a little bit as well. It makes him involved with people, and he's been carefully uninvolved with people deliberately for quite a long time. And all of a sudden, Gran has crashed into his world. And she's done as a fruitcake.
So yes, okay. So these books, and there's a whole series of them.
The whole swag of them.
If you looked up on internet or something for that genre, am I allowed to say this?
You're allowed to say it now.
Will I say this word several times? Would you get a list of them?
Yes, you
would
can.
imagine.
The way I did this was simply put an Uplit plus Guardian article.
Okay, and that
it
listed
came
a
up with
few.
an article which had links to other areas
Yes,
as well.
yes.
And some of these books have won awards and have been on bestseller lists. So
Well, like an Eleanor Oliphant,
Yes,
I think she won
yes, and that's on my-
first published
that's
book.
the next
Yeah.
one
And I
I
remember
want
when
to
we
read.
spoke about that, Eleanor Oliphant.
Eleanor Oliphant, yes.
it's perfectly fine.
Fine.
That had a nice ending. I mean, we all felt in the
Yes,
end.
yes.
It
I haven't
was
read it yet,
A
so don't tell
kind
me.
book.
It's kind. I think that's the central theme.
Yes.
Is of kind. Within the trauma that she has come through.
Yes.
That there's this kindness.
And it's a
that's-
transformation.
and a transformation.
And it sounds like in your book
Yeah.
too, there was a transformation of Major Tom to become more, so kindness can change the world.
Yes.
Oh, I'm feeling so good now. We've
Well, of
really
course, at
done.
the end, I did feel, quite nice and kind and uplifted and smiled at children in the street for, half an hour.
So there wasn't any sort of pity you didn't have it on the train today with all those noisy children.
I wasn't smiling at the children on the train
No,
today.
definitely not.
I love the idea of Gran ringing Major Tom, and
It was just,
saying, "I'm lost."
I was just laughing because, yes, she got lost. She'd actually gone out, I think she'd gone out to do the shopping. She'd gone out to do something, and she had been asked to not leave the house, Gran, unless, one of us is with you. But when she's in a good space, she feels quite confident. But once she got out, she lost that confidence and she forgot where she was going. She couldn't work out where she was. And all she knew was that if she pushed the recall button...
Oh, the good old recall on
was
your
the
phone.
recall button. Because she had no idea what her phone number was or anything, but she knew that if she pushed the recall button, it would be the last person she spoke to. Well, the last person she spoke to was Major Tom, because he'd called thinking it was his ex-wife.
Oh my goodness!
And that was when she said, I'm lost. Can you help me get home?
Lovely. Well, thank you. That's inspired us to look at another group of, I won't say genre. Look at another genre again. And we're going to move on to Julie, which is getting back to some mystery.
A different genre.
A different genre.
So, this is a good old murder mystery called Death of a Wine Merchant. It's by David Dickinson. And it's a series of Edwardian period whodunits, and it features a sleuth by the name of a gentleman sleuth by the name of Lord Francis Powerscourt. And so just a bit about David Dickinson, because he's quite an interesting character, I thought.
This is the author.
The author, sorry, yeah. He was born in Dublin. He moved to England, and he went to Cambridge and studied classics. And some of his sort of references to the classics comes out in his writing. And following that, he worked at the BBC, and he produced, he edited the BBC's Panorama and Newsnight. And he also worked on the BBC documentary of the monarchy, tracing the fortunes and prospects of the British monarchy. But it was around this time that he started writing crime fiction, which is basically what he was really wanting to do. And so he, this is a series with Francis Powerscourt, but there's another series I haven't of crime and sleuthing. I haven't got onto that yet, but I think I might at some stage. So he focuses on aristocratic figures and quite interesting destinations and locations, and the crimes and the secrets of the rich and famous, and to be quite honest, I think he quite enjoys poking quite a bit of fun at them as well. He's so basically the elite of Britain are getting involved in all sorts of Machiavellian plots and difficulties, and it's all sort of quite satisfying, really, because you see what the shenanigans they get up to. As I said, this is set at the turn of the 20th century in Edwardian times, and he often includes fictionalised versions of political events of the time. And so, for example, the first novel in this series is called Good Night, Sweet Prince, and comes from Shakespeare's play Hamlet, and deals with the death of Prince Eddie, who's Queen Victoria's fictional grandson. I've also read
it was a real grandson.
There was a real grandson, so this is a fictional one.
A fictional one still called Eddie. Okay.
Yeah. So the first one I read of in the series was Death of a Pilgrim, which Valda passed on to me because it deals with the walk of the Santiago de Compostela.
Yes.
So there's that's called Death of a Pilgrim, and there's not just one death but many deaths along the way of the pilgrims.
Did anybody get there alive?
Yes.
Well, you were
We were
beginning
lucky,
to
weren't we?
wonder.
We were very lucky.
whether
We didn't
they
find any
were
death and destruction on the way, but never mind.
So anyway, Francis himself, he comes from Irish aristocracy, and he's married to Lady Lucy, and they've got 2 children. And his early career was in army intelligence in India and Afghanistan. It's all very Raj and everything, and he served with distinction. And he was so he discovered that he had a talent for detection, and that's how he sort of segued into being a super sleuth. And he's great friends with a chap called Johnny Fitzgerald, and he has Francis has connections in high places, which he taps into. And Johnny and Francis grew up together in Ireland, and Johnny is an aide and a confidant to Francis and assists in his investigations, and they've saved each other's lives during their army service together, but not to forget Lady Lucy, who also gets involved in the investigations. She's key in it as well. She's just not in the sort of wings. So anyway, in Death of a Wine Merchant, again it's all very high society, and there's a very high society wedding in Norfolk, and a very unwelcome guest in the form of death gate crashes this wedding, and so Francis is summoned by a barrister friend who's called Charles Augustus Pugh to investigate this singular case of murder. The dead man is a man called Randolph Colville, who's a successful wine merchant, and he's the father of the groom. And the murderer would appear to be his brother, Cosmo, who's found with the smoking gun, as it were, in the same room with holding a gun. But is this a modern-day version of Cain and Abel? Or is there more to it than that? And Cosmo isn't speaking, because Cosmo has become mute and absolutely adamantly refuses to say a thing. And so time's running out for Cosmo, and he gets arrested, and there's possibility that he's going to go to the gallows because he's not going to say anything. Anyway, so Francis has to act fast and sets out to discover all that he can about the dead man and the dead man's family, and of course Cosmo. And he thinks that Cosmo's silence can only be for 2 reasons: either that he's protecting a woman, as it could possibly be, or a family scandal. And there is a hint to some terrible family scandal but everyone's absolutely buttoned up and not saying anything.
Aristocracy.
I know. And at one stage, the wife, I think of Cosmo's wife, nearly lets the cat out of the bag, and then she buttons up again and totally refuses to say another thing. They're all, not saying anything. So Francis sets out to discover what's going on. So he needs to find out what, is the wine trade, something in the wine trade going, involved with what's going on. And he finds out this terrible thing going on in the wine trade. And what's happened is that back in the sort of late 1880s, somewhere around there, there'd been a terrible disease in the French vineyards that had wiped out all the vines. And so the theory was that prior to the wine being wiped out, lots of it had been stored in castles and cellars all over the place. And so there's these wine tasting dinners in London where the so-called wine comes from, and the reason that they can still access this wine back, way back in 1907 is because they've got these back stocks of wine. Not so. Francis uncovers this terrible scandal going on whereby the wine is made in London. It's never seen a French vineyard. And it's
I think that goes on today as well. I think there is a little bit of that too.
Sounds like Chinese wine to me.
And one of Francis's friends is a wine connoisseur, and he starts sleuthing and comes up with all these hilarious recipes that he's uncovered that are, people in warehouses in London are making, like this orange peel and raisins and God knows what.
Lovely.
Very funny. So the Colville, so the wine trade is not looking very healthy and very, very dishonest. And there's a bitter rivalry with another wine merchant company in who's a competitor of the Colvilles. So he thinks that it's possibly got something to do with that. Anyway, so he sets off to France to sort of try and uncover if anything can be uncovered in the French vineyards and down in where these wines were made, in the towns and vineyards of Burgundy. And it turns out that the whole business with the wine malpractice is a complete red herring.
Well, don't tell us a spoiler.
No, I'm not going to tell.
No.
But it involves what you might imagine what goes on in high, in aristocratic circles, where there's a fair bit of bed swapping.
Yes.
Sounds like a bit of Downton
So you
Abbey
don't.
story.
Well, yes, and there's nothing that's sort of untoward. It's all very proper. Anyway, so in France, Lady Lucy and Johnny are also helping him uncover these things. But Francis himself gets abducted by these villains who realise that Francis is on to them in terms of uncovering what's going on in the wine, in the malpractice in the wine industry, and they abduct him, and it's so funny. He ends up in a wine press, and it looks seriously like he's going to be shoved into the wine press, but he gets out of
new
that.
flavour.
It really, and then he ends up in a mental asylum for a day or so in a case of mistaken identity. Oh, it's just so funny. Anyway, he gets out, and obviously, and he makes it back to England, and so he's found out during his time in Burgundy. He has actually found out the real reason why.
Okay. So the story comes
Randolph,
to some
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we know why Randolph was killed, but we don't know. I can tell you that it wasn't Cosmo. No, but somebody else. It was someone else.
Okay.
But there's a wonderful court scene, and and it's a bit nail biting, and all is revealed in the court scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still worth reading, Julie, after all that detail.
After all that, definitely, yes. Oh no, I'm not. I don't think there's the main. I'm not going to do the main spoiler, but
No.
yeah,
But it sounds a fun book to read.
It
so
is
even
fun.
though
A lot of fun.
it's a mystery. Now, that author's written as a part of a series.
It is. This is the 9th in a series, and there's quite a few.
Do you need to read them in sequence in
I
order
don't
to
think
follow
so.
what's
No,
going on?
I don't think so personally. But I mean, if I had started in the correct order, maybe I might have said that. But no,
They kind of
No.
stand alone.
They can stand alone.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
So,
yes.
what was the title again in the author?
Death of a Wine Merchant by David Dickinson.
Just show the
Oh,
because we're on TV now.
yes.
And did he also write the one
And he
about
wrote
the
The
pilgrim?
Death of the Pilgrim.
And that's the first one, isn't it? You said,
No,
is
I
that
don't
right?
think this
No?
is the first
Sorry.
one. No.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's a
So
fair
what's
way
some
down
of
the
the
list.
others?
Good Night, Sweet Prince, Death and the Jubilee, Death of an Old Master, Death of a Chancellor, Death Called to the Bar, Death on the Newski Prospect, Death on the Holy Mountain, and Death. Oh, yeah. And
So they all
these
got
two.
death.
And apart from Good Night, Sweet Prince.
Yes. So if you're looking for titles, start with death.
Start with Death, yes.
And you're sure to find some.
And
But-
that's the first clue.
Yeah, but but what Francis uncovers is absolutely shocking in Edwardian in terms of the murderer. It's absolutely shocking in terms of Edwardian society. So it's a good yarn, and I like the central characters. You know, Francis and Lucy and Johnny. They're the main characters, and I like the way he pokes a bit of fun at them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
So-
when Valda, when you did that Death of a Pilgrim, you also found it easy. No, I wouldn't say easy reading, but it gripped you and you went all the way
It
through.
was easy reading.
Yes.
But also he incorporates a lot of the history of the context, the geography of the context too, which I think adds to it.
Well, it sounds like he does quite a bit of research.
Oh,
too.
he would do, and this I think this business about the wine, you know, the goings on in the wine trade and at that time. I don't know if it's true, but
there's could have been quite
I
a
don't
few
like to think
books.
it's true.
no, but I'm sure it probably is.
I think in any industry there's probably a
Yes,
little
I
bit
would
and
say
a lot
so,
of
yes.
a lot of
The dark
malfeasance.
side.
the dark side.
But yes, you get a lot about what goes on in the wine trade, and that's interesting. And then, you know, you go to France and there's lots of, you know, interesting detail about France, but also where the wedding takes place in Norfolk. And yes, yeah.
And that's a period book because it's set in the Edwardian.
Edwardian, yes. So
Right.
it's an yeah.
Gosh,
Has
thank
history,
you.
yeah.
Thank you. Well, let's take a little break, and we have something from Zorba the Greek, seeing we want to all dance at times. And if I remember rightly, when that all came out, we all got into dancing, Greek dancing, and roaring off to Greece and trying to have a good time, if I remember rightly. I never got to Greece at that time, but never mind. Okay, let's turn on and see how we go with that. Well, welcome back, everybody. You're listening to, what are we? Book Lovers Corner. We nearly forgot. Book Lovers Corner, brought to you on Arrow 92.7 FM, and we're currently sponsored by Almo's Books, High Street, Carterton. Now, we have a third presenter, and that's Valda. Valda, what have you been reading?
Well, now that I'm back from Greece...
Oh, you've been dancing in the aisles,
in my head.
Yes.
Remembering times past. I have chosen 2 books this week, and they go back to my attendance at the Readers and Writers Festival at the International Festival of Arts in Wellington in 2004. And they are, well, that particular festival was focused on essayists.
And we haven't done that before.
No, so this is a new genre, and
That's for our certain listener who hates the word, but never mind, we'll use it again.
And so the 2 essayists that I'm focusing on this time, there is a third whom I will focus on next time. This time it's a guy called Elliot Weinberger, and another guy called Ingo Schultz. And I'll focus first on Elliot Weinberger, who was born in 1949 in New York. He is an incredibly prolific guy and has an incredibly diverse range of abilities in various fields. He's an essayist, which is the focus for today, but he's also an editor. He is a translator, and so in fact he translated Octavia Paz, who was in fact in 1990 a Nobel Prize winning writer. He got the Nobel Prize for Literature, and so I had to go and Google him, such as my ignorance, and of course he's a Mexican poet. So that was interesting. He's also translated others like Bei Dao, who is a Chinese poet.
Yes.
So you would know, you know of him,
and
Jackie?
I followed that up when I read your notes, because I have a lot of Chinese poetry.
Yeah.
And yes, I have some of that. Yeah.
And so he writes in his essays a very wide-ranging range of topics. And his style is quite, can be described as experimental. He does sort of a combination of documentary plus prose plus poetry. And I think you commented on that, Jackie, when we were having our coffee beforehand.
Yes, I thought that when some of the essays that I read of his, not in the same book that you had, it's like reading. He's very erudite. He just everything is so beautifully researched. He's so scholarly. But it's like reading a mix of Clive James and Bill Bryson. But it's just lovely. Everything is just perfectly balanced in the ones that I liked.
And one that intrigued me. It's not in the book that I'm reviewing is Karmic Traces, but one that apparently was received very well was What I Heard About Iraq. So he's written an essay called What I Heard About Iraq, and such was the reception of this essay that The Guardian said every war has its classic anti-war book.
Yes, I read that.
And here is Iraq's. So that was, and that's actually a very powerful
endorsement.
Yes. And not only that, out of it has come a prize-winning theatre piece, 2 cantatas, 2 prize-winning radio plays, dance performance, and arts installations. Now, when you actually think a piece of writing that can then generate such creativity is quite extraordinary. I mean, it's not a common thing. So I found that really fascinating. And apparently in the anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, on the 20th of March 2006, readings and performances resulting out of that book were performed internationally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
So it's got a global reach. So that particular work on its own has got a global reach.
Yes.
So he also contributes the New York Review of Books and the London Review of Books. But focusing on karmic traces, in order to try and, well, the range within karmic traces, it goes from Iceland to the Atacama Desert to Hong Kong. So, it's globally, he goes all over the place, all over the world. And then he focuses on strange religious cults and strange small animals. And it's to do with the strange small animals.
This is where we go to get to that.
I know where we're going with this.
I'm going to read you one of his, it's a short story, this essay, but it gives you a sense, I think, of his writing. And it's Naked Mole Rats. Now, Jackie, you've got a comment to add on
yes. Years ago in a film festival, there was a short film about the naked mole rat. And I can remember it very clearly because it was completely bizarre.
that. Well, they are totally bizarre creatures. Naked mole rats have no fur, but their lips are hairy. Their pinkish mottled skin is loose and hangs in folds, like something that has lost a great deal of weight. The easier to squirm through their narrow tunnels. Incisors protrude from their mouths like pincers, the only feature of their undefined faces. One naked mole rat can fit across your fingers, its tail dangling down. They have been under the earth for at least 3 million years.
Good grief.
They never surface. They are blind. The world is not a labyrinth, but a straight tunnel, a mile or two long, with innumerable cul-de-sacs branching off, and certain larger chambers. They live on the tuberous roots that grow towards them. As many as 300 inhabit a colony, moving a ton of dirt every month. They have a caste system, tripartite, like the Indian. The smallest among them are the diggers and food gatherers who work through the night in a line, male and female equally, the first gnawing the earth and kicking it back to the next, who kicks it back until the last, who digs a temporary hole to the surface. Kicks out the dirt, its rump exposed to the moon and predators, and then plugs the hole again. When they come across a root, they chew off pieces to carry to others. The medium-sized are the warriors, who try to fend off the rufous-beaked snakes, the file snakes, the white-lipped snakes, and the sandboas that sometimes find their way in. They attack with repeated tiny bites that are, if the snake is small enough, mysteriously, instantly fatal. When by chance 2 colonies of naked mole rats tunnel into each other, their warriors fight to the death.
Where are they found? Sorry.
Well, I presume in the States.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm not sure. I can't remember. I just remember seeing pictures of it and they were in they'd taken a colony out and put them into a laboratory. And that's what this documentary was about, how they were managing these. They were the strangest looking things. I can't see the point of them myself, but
I'll just read a little bit more because it's
fascinating.
These castes serve the largest, who are the breeders. Unique among mammals, only one female reproduces. She is by far the longest and the fattest and the most aggressive in the colony. If she dies, there is chaos. She is attended to by 1 to 3 males who do nothing else. They spend their time nuzzling her, have sex, initiated by her, by mounting her from behind for 15 seconds, bracing themselves by holding their front legs against the walls of the tunnel, and mainly failing. When she becomes pregnant, the teats of every colony member, male and female, enlarge, reach their peak at the birth, and then shrink. Just before birth, the female runs wildly through the tunnels. She has 4 or 5 litters a year of a dozen pups. And so you go on. And apparently all his facts are verifiable.
Yes, that's what he makes a point of doing, isn't it?
It's
Sure.
yes, and
So that's an essay.
that is an essay, and there's another page, and it's just mind-blowing stuff.
But it's easy read. It's not heavy. There's a lot of fact in that, but you can't stop reading
That's
it.
an easy read.
Yes.
Some of them are not easy reads, but the last one in this particular, in the Karmic Traces, is an essay called The Falls. And what he does is recaps 3,000 years of history on our planet, uncovering the deep roots of contemporary racism and violence. It is extraordinary. I mean, you read it and you see things from different perspectives. And it just actually, I find it quite mind-blowing. So some things I find difficult to read, other things are fascinating, like the mole rat. And other things are mind-blowing, like The Falls. He's a very, very interesting writer. And now, unfortunately, he's not available in the Carterton Library nor at Elmo's, but I'm sure that you could order it in or go to...
They're quite difficult to find. I looked for that one in the Wellington Library. It wasn't there. And the only one that was there was the book that I used to own many years ago, so it's quite old.
Yes.
And I don't think they're in print. I think you do have to really look for
Oh, well,
them.
that would make sense. But you're very welcome to borrow this one, Jackie.
But one can always go onto something like Book Depository or one of these and search or do a
Amazon or
global
something.
search.
Well, they are available on... Some are available on Amazon, I noticed when I...
But he
did that.
sounds like he's totally interested in life and the world in all its
Absolutely.
differences and things.
Yeah.
So no romance there. It's real
it's all factual.
educative,
quite-
I would imagine.
I think I think the way I look at him, I think he's the sort of person who something attracts his attention and he follows it and he studies it and he gathers as much information until he's really an expert in that particular interest.
But
And
this
then
is the
he
sort
writes
of,
about
I was
it.
going to say, this is the sort of book you read before you go on a quiz program, because he sounds like he's picked
Well,
on some
I would
really,
love to have him on a quiz team. I mean,
yeah,
that
on
would
a
be
quiz team
brilliant,
would be
yes.
wonderful. You win all the quizzes.
But there is
Yes.
something about his whole approach to it is very scholarly,
Right.
And you when he
But
says everything in there is verifiable,
Yeah.
and I think that's quite comforting if you're reading it for information.
So, briefly then, the next one is Ingo Schultz, 33 Moments of Happiness. You've got to make sure that you don't confuse Ingo Schultz, the writer, with the one who is the track and field athlete, now retired, or the one who is the basketball player. So it's obviously
It's
a
quite a
name
common
that's
name.
obviously, yes. So he was born in 1962 in Dresden, when of course it was still East Germany. And prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, he was actually the assistant director of a theatre company, the state director of the State Theatre Company in Altenburg. And he actually slept through the fall. He lived in Berlin. He slept through the fall of the Berlin Wall, which
That's
was
something
quite,
to remember, yes.
quite. Do you remember it? I was asleep.
I was asleep, yes.
So he slept through the 9th of November 1989, and after that, he started a newspaper. You know, I suppose with the freedom, you if you're a creative individual, what do? Start a newspaper, and through that he started writing. And not long after that, he spent 6 months in St. Petersburg, where the 33 Moments of Happiness was generated from.
Is that a novel? Sorry, this is
Well, it's a series of essays.
Oh, again, the essays,
and
sorry,
again,
yes.
it's totally different from Elliot Weinberger. It's really, it's like it's off the planet. But what he's done, of course, he went to Moscow at a time after Germany had reunified.
Yes.
I mean, what a time of change it was for Germany and for Russia. And it wasn't, you still had the issues of the Second World War between both countries. And so what he's doing in his essays, you've got like an array of confused characters, which is, as you could expect to exist after the events of the previous decades. And they're caught at crossroads of a country's history, which makes sense because they are all at both Germany and Russia at crossroads then. And he does moving vignettes, very, very comic vignettes. And some of them are so bizarre.
Are they readable, though? Then?
And they are readable, but I would not, in fact, buy another book of his.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No,
It's actually... It's
So your experience of them was enough?
The experience of them was enough, but intriguing.
Okay.
And I mean, he, as a person, when he read from you, from his book of essays, the difference between him and Elliot Weinberger, both of them read, and different presentations. One was obviously an actor, as you would expect of somebody who was directing a state theatre, but the other is much more, a researcher, a academic sort of person. And I think for that reason, it was intriguing having them together.
Yes, well, it's a
and because they are so different.
Right.
Would you recommend him to people?
I would recommend him. I don't think his work is very easy to get hold of, but if you can, and again, you're welcome to read this, they're worthwhile for the quirkiness because they're talking about life. He's a very keen observer of people, and he's a very, very keen listener to conversations. And so he's able to craft all that into these very sort of off-the-wall experiences or essays which we would not think of in our life, but actually they're probably not too remote from what happens in Russia and those.
Yeah. So two very different ones. And an essay is really an interesting, because it's got a definite structure. It's obviously shorter than a novel, but they've got to get a lot out in that short period. It's not a story, it's an essay. So it's often quite literary in a sense. Gosh, Valda, thank you so much. Now we're coming towards the end, and I have to say thank you all for actually presenting very different books, and also different genres, shall we say. But I think we should go back again to the essays again, because some of the best writing is in essay form. And I don't know how you guys feel, but there's often a lot of essays out there. It's not as popular as it used to be.
No, it's not.
No.
And I think because Valda chose these, I went back and I had a look, because I had once owned one of those books by Weinberger. And I think, yes, it's something that I will go back and have a look at, because it is actually really lovely to read an essay, and I'd forgotten how lovely it was.
Yes, and I think because it's not something I would normally do, and I got into it because of going to this festival.
Yes, well, that's
years
the thing
ago.
About book festivals. You get open to different,
yes.
and one should be exciting and try different
And it
writers.
resurrects things that you perhaps have forgotten or overlooked for a long time.
So next time I'll continue on with the essay theme with Jenny Diskey.
Okay.
But encompass her and her wider work as well, because she in fact died last year, and so it's a way of honouring her too. Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody. You have been listening to Booklovers Corner, and before I say goodbye, just to remind you that we're supported by Alma's, and the other thing is we are being photographed. So those of you who want to really know what we look like, you can see us on Wairarapa TV, which is channel 41, channel 41. I'm not dyslexic, but I did see it differently. On a Tuesday at 7 p.m. and a Wednesday at 11 a.m. So actually we're on twice. Oh, We'll have to remember that. Only to be seen within the Wairarapa, unfortunately. But those
Or
of you-
fortunately,
or
yes.
fortunately.
Depending on your point of view.
That's right. But you can also listen to this program again on podcast. So if you go to Arrow Radio and look for podcasts, and we're under Booklovers Corner, you can catch this again. And I must say, I have relatives overseas who listen. So when one wonders who listens, we do have outside, overseas, international. So quickly, as we do a quick round, Jackie, what was your book again?
My book was Calling Major Tom by David Barnett, published 2017 by Orion Books.
Thank you, and goodbye to Jackie.
Goodbye, Margie.
And Julie?
And mine was Death of a Wine Merchant by David Dickinson, published by Constable, 2010.
Good, thank you, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
And mine were Karmic Traces by Elliot Weinberger and 33 Moments of Happiness by Ingo Schultz, which in fact generated for me, could I find 33 moments of happiness? And so last night as I was going to sleep, I was going through counting moments of happiness in my life. And so you might like to think about 33 moments of happiness in your life.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Valda. Right, well, that's the end of this program for today, and we hope we'll catch you on the 22nd of May. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.